Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to Top Energy. We have with us Mr. David Banham. We have you in person today.
Yes, we do.
Welcome. And with you, a representative from Top Energy.
Yes.
And you are?
I'm Calvin Moore. I'm the Procurement and Facilities Manager for Top Energy.
Okay, so Mr. Banham, we have your evidence. We've pre-read it, but feel free to take us through it and provide a summary if you like.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Yes, I am here in person today. Last time I think I appeared before you, I was in Westport, down the other end of the South Island, so it's nice to be up in the county today. So similar to what I did in the hearing one, I have got a brief PowerPoint presentation, which I'll run through. It basically just summarises my evidence. A copy of that, I think I've sent that to AK and should be with you in your inboxes.
Correct.
A PDF version of it as well. So I'll run us through that. And then Mr. Nord is also available here. If there's any sort of technical Top Energy related questions that need to be asked, he's here for that as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say is that we're fairly close to the same panel that you presented to in hearing one, where I think you sort of summarised where Top Energy was coming from. So.
Yes. So I don't plan to go back over that. You had the corporate evidence statement of Mr. Doherty, which is still available. I've mentioned in my evidence, but I don't plan to go back over that temporarily. It's pretty well versed. First of all, I just wanted to acknowledge the work of the council officers on these topics. In an overall sense, I think they've actually done a really good job with what is a very complex topic with competing interests. So I just thought I'd acknowledge that first. It's a difficult task being a Section 42A reporting planners. I just want to acknowledge that. So, and as I go, I'm happy to take any questions or clarifications that you may have as we work through the presentation. So what I'll briefly cover is the relationship of Top Energy's network to the overlays. There's points I've made in my evidence around additional objectives and policies. Also talk about ecosystems in the Indigenous biodiversity chapter. Quite a lot of focus in my evidence was on the provisions relating to new buildings and structures and extension to alteration rules, which appear across all the topics, so I will spend a bit of time there. And to a lesser extent, earthworks and Indigenous vegetation clearance rules, and I've also got a couple of other matters that I'll pick up, rats and mice at the end. So first of all, this was included as an attachment to my evidence in chief. And what we've done here is we've overlaid, Top Energy have overlaid their existing network alongside the natural environment overlays. Just to give a sense, obviously, and you'll be well aware that the extent of these areas is large across the district, and there is quite a clear relationship between Top Energy's existing network within that. So that's attachment one, I think, of my evidence, and that's just the natural environment overlay. The second image, which is also attached to my evidence, relates to the coastal environment overlay. Now, at this scale, it's not as apparent, but if you zoom in, you can see that there actually are a large amount of Top Energy's network, in lieu of the fact that there's a lot of coastal settlements in far north, is in the coastal environment. So there's a lot of existing network in there. Mr. Node made the point before, which I'll make, is when you're looking at these imageries of Top Energy's network, it looks like a lung, like in the capillaries, the veins coming out, and I guess it's a good analogy to make because it's crucial. It's the oxygen which serves businesses and communities far north as well in terms of electricity supply. So, a couple of points that are made in my evidence, which I'll just highlight now. Obviously, very well aware the Far North District is large, I think one of the largest, if not the largest in the country, and it's dispersed, and the overlays are extensive. And I think those two images I've just shown you there demonstrate that. It also demonstrates that Top Energy's existing network interacts with these overlays as shown on the maps. As you're aware, SNAs aren't mapped, but it's inevitable that there'll be a significant relationship between areas of Indigenous vegetation and Top Energy's network. So just that last bullet point there, Top Energy's focus, and it's the focus of my evidence as well in terms of the submission, is to ensure that the provisions adequately provide for the operational and functional need of infrastructure and network utilities to be located in these overlays. Just to expand on that slightly, a key focus has been on, and you'll see this right throughout Top Energy's submission and my evidence related to that, is on the operation, repair, maintenance, and upgrading of existing infrastructure, which is already there. There's a distinction, in my view, between that and new infrastructure. So if you are going to be establishing new infrastructure in these outstanding landscapes, high natural character areas, that's different. That's a different consideration, because at that point, I accept that there may be a need to go through a consenting pathway for that, because there could be the consideration of alternatives. There could be a fact that it could avoid the area. But when you've got an existing network that's already threaded, it's there. It has an operational and functional need to be there because it's already there servicing a community. So I just make that distinction that a lot of the focus of my evidence is on that first component. There's an acceptance for myself and understand Top Energy as well, that they understand that if they are going to build new infrastructure in these areas, that it may be necessary to go through a resource consent, because there could be a way around it. So the first point I'll take you to is additional objectives and policies. So just the key point there is, in my view, there needs to be adequate recognition and provision for Top Energy's network and the objectives and policies. Now, the reporting officers declared a preference that it's not actually the reporting officers, it's also the planning structure, that these are located in the infrastructure chapter. I accept that. If they're located in the infrastructure chapter, that could be fine. But just the point I'd make there is that if that is the case, then rather than those submission points being accepted in part or rejected, I think they should be deferred to hearing 12, which is the infrastructure chapter hearing, where they can be considered in terms of the wording for those objectives and policies. In the meantime, in the body of my evidence, I have suggested an advice note. You heard from the reporting officers this morning that they use notes in the rules to highlight where there is overlaps or other rules elsewhere. I think it could be useful to include an advice note in the relevant overlay chapters to highlight that the objectives and policies for infrastructure are located in the infrastructure chapter. So I think that could work for me.
Okay, so rather than possibly duplicating what would be in the infrastructure chapter, we'll just now say just a reference to where you find those provisions.
I think that could be helpful. I agree you don't want to duplicate the exact same objectives and policies across multiple district-wide chapters. Yes. So I accept the rationale that the reporting officers have used there, and the point I was making about the deferral of those submission points is if we are going to say that they're in the infrastructure chapter, then I think we should consider them in that topic.
Yes.
So is the idea to have all the infrastructure provisions in one chapter?
That seems to be the architecture and approach that the council are taking to the plan, which I accept could work. The national planning standards kind of give you a bit of conflicting direction on that. They say if anything to do with natural environment, provision should be in the natural environment overlays, or anything to do with infrastructure. But in this case, the council has put a lot of it in the infrastructure chapter, and in my opinion, that's acceptable, but then it just really is going to put the spotlight on that infrastructure topic when we come to it.
Wouldn't it be an advantage to you as an infrastructure provider for it all to be in one chapter, so that if you're looking at doing something, you just go to chapter 14, whatever it is?
I accept that there would be some...
go through, been working through.
Yes, no, you could. And look, then the issue I think you've got there as well is you've got the objectives and policies in the infrastructure chapter, but we're also considering in the scope of these chapters, there's rules relating to infrastructure and network utility providers in these overlays in these chapters. So I don't think it's necessarily clear cut to say 100% of all the infrastructure provisions would be in the infrastructure chapter, because there may be that they are better located in terms of the rules considering here in this chapter. But in terms of the objectives and policies, notwithstanding that you've got a strategic direction chapter as well, you're considering in the mix, I accept that in the infrastructure chapter could be good and work, in my opinion, and that an advice note directing to that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, because I was weighing up both of the arguments, and I was thinking, well, who's to be informed by the objectives and policies if they are scattered throughout the plan? It wouldn't be, to a sort of a person doing a residential development or anything. They don't really need to know about the infrastructure provisions. So it'll be the infrastructure providers making a reporting planner aware of what the relevant objectives and policies, the position of infrastructure, the rules that apply to infrastructure only and not other things. And obviously someone like yourself preparing those applications would be making the reporting planner aware of it. As Commissioner Watson said, you'd be referring to mostly one chapter, excepting this isn't going to be 100% binary, and there will be other references to infrastructure where relevant, rather than multiple sections of the plan, and of course us making sure that every single linkage to potential infrastructure is referenced in every single chapter of the plan, making sure we don't miss out.
Yeah, I think that's an acceptable approach, and I've seen examples across the country in the plan reviews where someone's done a different approach, but in this case, if it's a direction from the council to put it into an infrastructure chapter, I can't see that as a problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's clean that up.
So moving on to ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity. Now, I put this in here just to highlight because I think there is a slight inconsistency here, just related to that last point. So there's reference to regionally significant infrastructure in IB Policy 5. So again, it's that consistency thing. So if it is determined, you determine that the infrastructure chapter is where these provisions should be, then I consider that there should be consistency in that regard. So consistency across the overlay chapters. And then what I also did highlight there was, given the direction and strategic direction, infrastructure objective 1, it should recognise both infrastructure and regionally significant infrastructure. So recall in hearing 1, at the higher point, there's reference to infrastructure. Now, Top Energy in that area, in my evidence, was also trying to say, make sure you reference regionally significant infrastructure. But I think that's an important distinction when you're looking at these provisions. Is regionally significant infrastructure is a defined term in the regional policy statement, and it means what is in the definition. Infrastructure is a broader term and includes a wider range of infrastructure, which is what I think should also be provided for in these objectives and policies. So I make that point there because I think there's a slight inconsistency where there is some reference to infrastructure, in particular regionally significant infrastructure and objectives and policies, which I'm supportive of. But I think if you are going to determine that, it should be in the infrastructure.
Is there a definition of infrastructure in the proposed plan?
Well, there's a definition.
Or are you going to rely on the RMA one?
I think it relies on the I'm looking at. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it relies on
the RMA is pretty broad, right?
Yeah, it's pretty broad, yes. So, look, if it was intended that it was only to reference regionally significant infrastructure,
Yes.
then that, again, that could be acceptable. But I think it needs to be very carefully looked at, is it infrastructure or regionally significant infrastructure? Because that will have some implications.
Does Top Energy have infrastructure that isn't regionally significant infrastructure?
Yes, yes, they do. So the definition of regionally significant infrastructure instantly includes a 110 kV line, 33 kV line, and then, again, I'm talking from memory here, but 11 kV lines based on if they service an isolated community. Okay. So that's not all of Top Energy's network. So there are 11 kV lines which will not meet that definition. There also are associated infrastructure that will not meet.
So it's lower level power lines.
Yes.
That Top Energy is still sort of maintaining operating. But also are there structures and other bits and pieces that would fit into an infrastructure definition?
Yeah, as I understand it, Top Energy's network is extensive and would include junction boxes and, well, substations are typically designated, but there's also junction boxes, transformers, that in the context to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very familiar with the definition, so up for me to determine. But outside of those strategic 11 kV lines, there's quite a bit more that would fall into that definition.
And are you satisfied that the RMA definition of infrastructure cover those things that aren't regionally significant?
I'm satisfied that they do, because that definition is quite broad. Don't have it in front of me again, but it does include electricity distribution lines. So that's why how you word it in the objective and policy, if you're meaning regionally significant infrastructure, that's regionally significant infrastructure, but if you mean infrastructure more generally, then I think you need to be very careful with the wording that it is. Okay, move on. So the other point, so this is the ecosystems and indigenous biodiversity, and it's just regarding the term minimum necessary. So the reporting officers have included the term number of rules. So I put in IB Rule 1, but also Natural Capital Rule 3. And I just, in basic sense, I question the virus of this and consider that the language is unworkable with the activity standard. In my opinion, there's significant ambiguity within that wording, and a case-by-case assessment and a permitted activity standard, in my view, is inappropriate. And really what this comes down to is that there's a significant risk, in my opinion, of additional time, cost and delay with interpretation, litigation, and enforcement of that. What is minimum necessary to a top energy as a network utility provider or infrastructure provider will be completely different to what might be minimum necessary for council versus trade logs in the public. So I've highlighted that point there because I think it is problematic, in my opinion, to use that terminology in a permitted activity rule. In my view, a permitted activity rule really needs to be clear, enforceable, and measurable, black and white. You either comply or you don't. If you have an element of judgment as to if you do comply or not, then that's not suitable as a standard, in my view.
Yeah, I understand the logic of that argument. I'm just wondering whether you have any alternative provisions. I don't think your evidence suggested any alternative.
I didn't. I just suggested the deletion of that word. Yeah. Because I understand that the reporting officers have included that response to submissions seeking something similar, which, you know, that's a submission, you can look at it, but my review on that would be that I don't think you can include that necessary that should just be deleted.
So the council officer's concern is probably a loss of control on those particular provisions. I mean, I understand subjectivity is not part of a permitted activity standard. I mean, I think that's fine. I think most people would accept that. But if they were to take out that qualification, you don't have any other alternative you might suggest?
I have no other alternative to suggest. I just looked at it on the basis of the addition of the wording. I'm comfortable because where that's included, it relates to the exclusions in IB Rule 1.
Yeah.
So there's a specific list of activities which are excluded from that requirement.
Yeah.
So unless the alternative, which could be looked at, would be some sort of limit on that, but I think you would need to really carefully consider that. I haven't turned my mind to that. I just looked at the wording on the face of it and said that I don't consider it appropriate.
It's quite hard to put an empirical measure on the category of infrastructure, for example, like you've got there, or you've got there, I suppose.
And it is quite a large list of provisions in there. So I think I can understand the reason why you would insert it, but I think it actually it'll create more problems than it solves.
Some of those, sorry, Robert, some of those, 1 through Roman numerals 1 through 7, some of those are pretty incidental type things, and fences, walking tracks, cycling tracks, etc. I mean, infrastructure is like in a category of its own. It sort of stands out in that list as something more significant. Probably not a word, but when you use them, isn't it? Whether there should be a split into 2 categories, maybe to upgrade or lawfully established existing infrastructure relating to those other categories there, and infrastructure and buildings may be dealt with in a different way. And, I guess that's something we need to look at.
So, I mean, you suggest not just delete it, but if we delete it, it is the minimum necessary for any of the following. We always have. You soon say to readers, it is for any of the following.
That's my suggestion currently, is to delete the minimum necessary included. Now, if you were to look into that further and have concerns with it, as Mr. Watson suggests, you could also look at redrafting or splitting. So it's quite an extensive list. You have 14 different activities listed in that rule. And I would argue the minimum necessary applies to all of those, would create the same issue I've raised, not just for infrastructure.
Could upgrade the whole system through Northland as a permitted activity. Maybe that's what Gangland for.
Well, look, in my view, I think it is appropriate to have scope for the operation, maintenance, repair and upgrade. Now, the key, which we'll come to, is the definition of upgrading. I'm here to talk about that today. I'll sort of highlight that later on in my evidence and presentation. But if you have got an existing network in an existing area, it has an operational and functional need to be there. Let's allow that to keep operating because that's servicing something. Where it is different, as I said at the start, is where you're doing something new. And if you're trying to put something new for there, well, actually, is that the appropriate place to go? Is that the only you can work through for an existing piece of linear infrastructure? I do think it's appropriate to have a permitted pathway.
And I suppose the word upgrade is the nub of the issue, because at what point does upgrade become replacement?
Yes, and I do.
Some people would say replacement is upgrade.
Well, and that's it. Is the meaning of terms and definitions. We're not hearing that until quite late on in the PCS hearing schedule, but I do raise it as a fundamental for a lot of. I think it's going to come up quite constantly, not just from Top Energy's perspective with upgrading, but a number of other terms, because it's going to be very difficult to say that rule is acceptable or kosher if we don't actually know what the definition is. But that's symptomatic of the process we're in. But I do highlight that as what is upgrading is key. I think, in my opinion, repair, operation, maintenance, it's a bit clearer. But upgrading, Commissioner Watson suggested, well, you can upgrade the whole network and increase it by 70% in size. That could be an issue. So I accept that definition is quite key.
Yeah, the building legislation uses the term repairs and maintenance, and that's come up before on some of the topics.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because I think maintenance includes an element of upgrading. To maintain something, you might have to replace some bits and pieces, particularly with newer bits and pieces. So
Yes.
okay. Well, as you say, this is possibly for a later hearing.
So that's move on to minimum necessary. As I mentioned in my evidence, I spend quite a lot of time talking about new buildings and structures and extension and operations rules. So one of the requirements recommended is a 10-metre height restriction. I've included the law references in there, it's in my evidence, but there's a number of rules that have included that. And really just highlighting that there's no specific consideration of the needs of the network utility provider in terms of what's a practical pole. So this is specifically relating to poles. So Top Energy advised that a standard pole height actually replacement is now typically 12.5. So, accepting, I'm not here to pretend that I'm not a landscape architect. I'm not here in that capacity. But what I'm trying to say is there's balance to the consideration of this matter. Not just a binary 10 metres is acceptable. I think there needs to be consideration of what is the operational and functional need of the infrastructure provider. And really that is because, okay, let's say it's maintained at 10 metres, but Top Energy's and what they advise is 12.5, then they're going to be constantly coming in every time they replace a power plant and having to do reasons, which in my view is an unnecessary consenting requirement and an additional cost of delay. So I think that's something that should be looked at in terms of the height limit to match what is the operational functional need of the network utility provider.
So is Top Energy's position that the height limit should be increased to match its standard height, or that there be no height limit?
Well, I think Top Energy would ideally say there should be no height limit, but taking into account the expert landscape evidence that we've got, I think that some sort of limit is appropriate. It's just, well, where is that limit? And so if you're looking at it in a 32 perspective, section 32 costs and benefits, if we are going to keep it at 10 metres, but Top Energy is saying, well, we're just going to have to be constantly coming in for resource consents, which I would hazard to say will assume would be granted, but there's this whole process associated with it.
So have you suggested an alternative height limit?
So my suggestion is 12.5 metres, I think is a suitable.
And I'll ask a silly question, and that is, what is a pie pole?
Oh, look, you beat me to it. So it's,
I don't know whether you mean bipole or pie pole.
No. So a single pole, obviously that's your generic single.
And that's the pie pole with the two.
That's a pie pole, and I had to ask on this and sort of show my ignorance. But it's because it looks like a pie, figure 3.6. Yeah, 3.14. Yeah, 3.14. There you go. Do very well on this. 3.14. So yeah, this is one of my other points, is the difference between a pole and a pie pole. So yeah, that pole on your left, pie pole on your right. And
Mr. Chairman,
yeah,
may I interrupt and ask a question about the illustrations?
Well, you could ask me a question.
I'll ask you a question. Mr. Chairman, how tall are the non-pie poles in that photograph?
Yeah, okay. How tall are you?
I've just included those as just to signify what the difference of a
And
single
that's why I was going to ask that question, is are they 12.5 metres?
No, I don't know. The short answer is they're on the right. Just in order to actually provide the on the right.
Yeah, the one on the right is the top energy network pole. The one on the left,
I just found that from Google. Yes. So just to demonstrate it. But I didn't.
Do you know how high the pie pole is, reason?
yeah, will be pretty much about the same height.
12.5?
And if you have a 12.5 limit, then it doesn't matter if there's a taller pie pole, because we still need to abide by the same height limit, right?
So
we're not asking for an exemption. for
But
the
anyway,
pie.
what you're saying is that your poles and pie poles would be 12.5 metres.
well, yes, in the height limit. What I'm also highlighting here is just so I'll come back to the image, but so top energy generally replaces pie poles with singular poles because they're cheaper. So and a single pole is cheaper than having a double pie pole, and that's because there's more resource in it. Usually they're custom made, whereas a single pole will come in by itself. And really, it's just to highlight there are operational and structural requirements for pie poles where it's needed, and generally where that does occur. So I'll go back to this image.
So just again, just so I can understand for my own edification, is it because you've got new technology that can put what you needed two poles for can now go on one pole because what you're using stronger materials?
Poles have changed, so we now use prefix concrete as standard, and in the past we used wooden poles. And obviously the way that they make them has improved, so the quality is better. Pipe poles just have a specific application nowadays, they're not standard.
And so generally where that is, it's just as a structural, an operational requirement, and again, understanding that it's usually because it needs to go for a greater expanse between poles, so two poles or term. And so the point I'm making here is where there already is an electricity line in one of these overlays, and it's needed to replace a pie pole at the same height or in a similar location, because that's what the rule relates to. I don't really understand why you would put a restriction on replacing a single pole with a pie pole. Now, I accept that the pie pole looks wider. Now, this is not exact science here, I'm just doing it indicatively, and we can come back to on the heights, but it's wider in the landscape, but it's there for a specific reason. Top energy, if you delete the pie pole requirement in this rule, aren't going to go around and replace all of their single poles with pie poles. It's a massive cost. They only do it when there's an operational need for it, which is usually structurally. And the point is that where that does happen, there's going to be, instead of saying single pole, single pole, single pole, there'll be pie pole, pie pole. There'll be less poles required over an expanse because it can go over greater expanse. That's how I've had it explained to me and how I understand it. But again, it's just highlighting that single pole and pie pole requirement in those rules is actually quite problematic. And in my opinion, should be deleted, because whether it's a pole or a pie pole, and there's a necessity for it to be there, isn't a concern in my opinion, and I think it should be deleted.
So at the moment, a pole is a permitted activity less than 10 metres, and a pie pole is a restricted discretionary.
I'm just going to go to the.
I'm just looking at 3.
Yeah, sorry, are we reading now?
Is it? So again, it's my evidence because this is in multiple.
Oh, sorry, the rule is in which chapter is it? The Indigenous by
Natural features of
values?
landscape.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's got little numbers.
See, if it was all in one chapter, you would have.
14 is political environment, eyeball.
So I talk about this in section 7 of my evidence. Now I grouped the rules all into one because the issues are similar, and I think the reporting officer's done something similar this morning. So I talk about the poles and pie pole requirement at 7.7, but the rules that it relates to is CER1, NATCR1, and NFLR1, and permitted standards. So it's listed in the footnote. So, yeah, are you happy for me to move on?
No, sorry, I was chopping and changing between your evidence and the actual provisions in the notified version of the plan.
Yes, yes.
Plus, I've also got the 4204 open, I'm trying to reconcile those as well. And I've only got one little screen.
Yes, no, fair enough. And look, just, I'll come to this later, but I didn't attach track change version provisions to my evidence precisely for that point. I think it gets, at this point, when you have probably, I don't know, a dozen planning witnesses all chucking provisions at you, my changes are actually quite nuanced, like your refinements. I don't actually have very wide ones, but on top of a track change, it can get quite complicated. And I'll come to it later. That's where I made a suggestion that some form of caucusing could be useful. But I'll come to that suggestion later. So I'll move on from pipeline. So the next one was the 20% gross floor area limit. So now this is in my opinion, how does this work to actually power poles? So it's unclear whether this will apply to existing network poles. And again, there's a couple of definition issues there. I think a power pole would quite comfortably fit within the definition of a structure in the plan, which I believe is repeating the RMA definition. Don't quote me on that. Yet the definition of gross floor area is difficult to see how you apply that definition to a power pole, which generally only have a small footprint. Now, so the point I'm making there is that power pole has this very small footprint. Now, an increase of 20% on something that small as a footprint of that would, to me, seem quite, or I would imagine would be quite imperceptible from a distance. And I question whether a 20% gross floor area limit, as it applies to infrastructure and utilities, is necessary. And I make the point that I recommend that power poles, transformers, and junction boxes are excluded from this requirement. Again, because I don't think the definitions work. I don't see a clear link between something increasing in scale, which is so quite small in its footprint anyway. So my recommendation was that it was deleted. And again, it's much for the same reasons as the height limit and the pipe pole situation that creates additional consenting, potentially unnecessary consenting burden. I'll just move on to the next one. So actually, this relates to upgrading. So again, it's a use of terminology. So throughout the chapters, there does appear to be some inconsistent use of terminology. I've highlighted that in my evidence, but for example, there's references to upgrading of an existing network utility, existing electricity network utilities, and above ground network utility, and those are across different rules. In my evidence, in chief, I've referenced where I've done that. As I've mentioned, there is no definition of upgrading. Top Energy submission has sought one. Now, acknowledging we're not, as I mentioned earlier, we're not here to talk about the definition of upgrading, but I do consider it's really relevant for the consideration of these provisions, where the panel ultimately does land on that definition. So there's nothing we can do about that right now, but put that to the side to say, well, when you do get to hearing 18 and you're considering these definitions, I think in part of it you're going to need to consider how you define that impacts on all these rules that you've heard in 17 hearings.
Well, we might get it as part of the infrastructure chapter. I think we don't necessarily have to wait till hearing 18.
Possibly, and I would be supportive of that. I think it's prudent because this point will be made a number of points, especially in that infrastructure chapter, because it's referenced in a lot of the objectives and policies. And it will state that whether it's upgrading or upgrading. I think, yeah, just making that point too. Now, so this is just a point around matters of discretion. So I've referenced the rules there in NATC. So these are actually the policies. So within the applicable rules, there's a link in matters of discretion back to NATC P6, CP10, NFL PA. Those policies are all sort of assessment criteria policies. They've got a long list of matters that you consider, which I think is fine and suitable. I've seen plenty of plans to do something like that. The point I was making there is that, again, it's that point, it refers to regionally significant infrastructure and not infrastructure in the broader. And so given the direction in the strategic direction chapter, I consider it's appropriate that wording of matters of discretion should be the operational and functional need of infrastructure. Now, I've said matters of discretion there because it's circular, it takes you to the policy, and whether that's changed in the policy or if it's changed as a specific matter of discretion, I think it's an architectural plan matter for council, but I do think it needs to be broadened to include infrastructure for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. Just moving on to activity status. So for NFL R1 and CR1, they have non-compliant activity statuses that apply when permitted and controlled activity are not met. Now, I talk about that in my evidence in chief and highlight how that works, but essentially, if it's not permitted or controlled and the control relates to a building area which wouldn't be relevant for an infrastructure application, it then seems to default to straight non-compliant, which in my view would have severe implications for infrastructure and utilities, and ultimately is a perverse outcome. It means that, so for this infrastructure, if we're talking about an existing line, it's already there as an operational and functional need, in my opinion, to be there, but then it's jumping straight to a non-compliant activity status. But it's not. I think that jump is too hard. I do accept in the case where the standard's not met, it should trigger a consent, but I consider that a restricted discretion activity would be appropriate in those instances rather than a straight non-compliant. And really that will come down to the objectives and policies around infrastructure and how you manage it, but there needs to be some balance achieved there. I don't think a non-compliant activity, which in my view means that something's not anticipated and provided for, whereas I think it is anticipated and provided for that there is infrastructure, especially in existing. I've just sort of picked up a quick list of some other issues within these rules. So with regard to NATC Rule 1, there's a provision in there about lighting poles by I think it's local authority, and that doesn't have a height limit on it or the same requirements, but then the rule underneath it does. So it seems to be inconsistent in my opinion. If there was to be determined it's appropriate to have no height limit, then I think as your questions were earlier, then Top Energy's preference would be that there is no height limit. But if there is to be a height limit, then I think it should be consistently applied across both provisions. A lighting pole, a power pole, I don't think there's a lot of difference there. So I sort of expand on that in my evidence in more detail. There also in NFL R1 appears to be an inconsistent height limit when you refer to the standard. It's 5 metres, but then there's 10 metres in the rule. So again, I think that's just a matter of clarification for reporting officers. Also within CR1, there would be no permitted activity pathway for the upgrading of existing utility in the coastal environment within a high or upstanding natural development area. Now, I know it's the conversation earlier when you layer up coastal environment, it's more sensitive, absolutely accepted. But again, if you've got an existing network utility through there, then there should be some scope, in my opinion, to still repair and maintain. Now that may lend itself to a different provision around upgrading, maybe tighter around upgrading, but in terms of the actual operation, repair and maintenance, I still consider that there should be a permitted activity pathway for that component. I haven't suggested any wording there, I've just highlighted that it just appears to be a straight resource consent on. Now, finally, one of the other ones is some of the rules. So CR1 includes a cross-reference to Infrastructure Rule 3. Again, Infrastructure Rule 3, we'll consider that in hearing, my numbers mixed up, 6 or 7 next year. So we have no ability to consider the wording of Infrastructure Rule 3. Top Energy have requested that rule be deleted in a comprehensive redrafting of it. So if you are going to include a cross-reference now, we'll determine it. It's quite hard to say, well, that's acceptable because we don't know what the rule is going to say. So it may be, of course, when you get to the end of this process and you're doing your deliberations on the final decision, that may clean itself up. But at the moment, it's, I certainly can't say that I agree with that because I'm looking at what IR3 says now, and Top Energy is going to get those to be deleted. So again, it might be that matter needs to be raised in the infrastructure here as well. Just moving on, only a couple more slides left, but this is earthworks and indigenous vegetation clearance rules. So actually, just at a high level, again, just acknowledging that there's been some really good changes from my perspective, from Top Energy's view, in terms of the operation, repair, maintenance, and upgrade of the utility. So that point has come through quite clearly. There is, however, in my opinion, a peculiar reference to Rule 1 within the rules it's sort of circular because it refers you to Rule 1 in its entirety, but then Rule 1 in its entirety is 2 pages long with multiple points, some of them which aren't relevant. So I've recommended that cross-reference be deleted, or at least clarified if to the relevant part of that rule it needs to be mentioned. Again, similar to previous points, I disagree with the non-compliant activity status in CR3 and NFL R3. I consider it should be, it's the same justification I just gave earlier. I think it should be restricted discretionary activity rather than a non-compliant for the operation, repair, maintenance and upgrading of the existing utility. And actually, I think I've repeated myself there. That's the same as no permitted activity pathway for, that's right, because in the coastal environment and the natural character ones is the same, sort of the same rule across both, where one says if you're in the coastal environment and natural character system, if you're in the natural character and the coastal environment, it's sort of the same issue, which will follow the end. Just a couple of rats and mice issues. Now, I know there was a bit of conversation this morning about repair and maintenance rules. My preference was that something was retained, just because it's explicit that it is. However, I accept that if the architecture of the plan and the, what's the word used, does work, and it does clearly do it, then I can accept that that works too. It's just, I think it can be very useful if it's explicitly said that it's permitted, but I accept that the way that the plan works and the structure, cool. So following that conversation this morning, I accept that, while my preference would be that you have it, it's also, I think, acceptable if you decide that the way that the plan works is clear enough that it's determined that those activities will be permitted. Just a couple of other points. Numbering conventions. So I raised that at the end with just an example in my evidence sheet. So that's in section 10.1. But this highlighted where there's this inconsistent use of numbering. Some go to ABC, and AA, BBC. I know the council has issued a clause 16 notice to fix it. I just think if it can be fixed, it's really helpful because when you're doing references to the rules, it makes a lot more sense when you're trying to find it. So that's just a simple one. And again, acknowledging the ands and ors, Mr. Hall, had a conversation with him. It is one of those deceptively simple things, but it is very important that it's clear and consistent across. And I just highlight, I think I find it's the same issue that you highlighted. Some have all, some don't. So as long as there's consistency, I don't mind. It's as long as it's consistent because it's quite important to how the rules work in practicality. So just in summary, ultimately, like I said at the start, I consider that the reporting officers have made a number of really constructive recommendations to address Top Energy's concerns in their submission. There are a number of other areas where I consider further amendments are necessary, but I think fundamentally the matters of refinement. I don't think it's massively far apart, to be completely honest. And that's why in my evidence, and again, this was a suggestion, it's ultimately up to you as a panel whether you decide to do this or not, but I think there could be some benefit in some caucusing on this to just narrow down the issues. I think, and I'm just offering to volunteer that I'm happy to do that. And there may be other parties that also want to be involved too.
Yes, well, I think we've had a bit of a chat about that as well, and we're definitely we haven't indicated that we want conferencing to happen for all topics, but certainly in areas where there are sort of highly technical provisions and a limited number of parties, where conferencing would probably be beneficial. So I'm assuming council officers have an open mind for us directing that. And I was just thinking whether we should build that into the infrastructure chapter, which someone could remind me what hearing number that is.
My presentation.
Sorry?
Is it 8?
8's residential.
Oh, 7?
But I'm for now. I think we're in infrastructure, is it?
No.
Hearing, oh, that's 18 minutes.
That's 12. Energy infrastructure? Yeah, 12 March.
March next year.
March next year.
So that gives us some opportunity to arrange for some. I'm happy to have this conversation. Well, I'm probably going to have this conversation now.
Just I guess also note I'm the reporting officer for the infrastructure.
Oh, well,
that's convenient.
Yeah.
Some these.
Yeah, so the question would be, would council officers prepare their 42A report and then want to conference with affected parties, or would you want to do that before you did your 42A? I can see benefits of either
We'll probably
option.
take some time to think about that from there. I know Transcouncil and another party who'd be.
Yeah, we'd expect Transpower to be there, but I don't know if anybody else, I don't think there's no other infrastructure providers, are there?
As well.
Sorry?
The telecommunications providers.
Yeah.
Can we get involved in the objectives and policies?
Are they? Yes. We've had sort of individual and group submissions from them, but they're probably in that chapter, aren't they?
They are in that chapter, but they have been more specifically focused on the rural level more than the sort of interface of overlays like top energy and Transpower particularly interested in.
Any other council officers want to comment?
No, I would just suggest that maybe we include that in our item.
I was going to say, I want you to think about it now, and maybe you could give it to us either at the end of this hearing or when you do your written response, is how you might think conferencing could work.
What we might consider is actually putting out some specific directions or requests, for example, producer statements and the like, to help support some of our thinking around some of the integration, design and provisions. So it might be for us to have a think beforehand that what the sort of things that we might expect somebody to come with other than provisions, maybe some specific evidence to help us out, which we're going to look at, but things like the rezonings as well, for example, sort of things that we think would be able to help us as much as come together.
Yeah, and look, I think, the benefit of it would be that, evidence would be reduced potentially, or you might end up having, a conferencing statement that is largely supportive of a suite of provisions.
Just in my view and experience with that, it can be quite constructive because you'll have one set of provisions for that topic, say a subtopic to where it's quite clear everyone's said if they're in a round for, and I think where it gets quite complex in my view is when you deal with 20 track change versions of things. And I know you deal with that constantly, but this is an instance where I think they're really are quite close, and we probably just narrow down the areas of disagreement. And certainly before the infrastructure hearing, Top Energy's submission, probably almost 40% of it is the infrastructure chapter. And I'm personally happy to be involved in that prior to the Section 42A report if it helps narrow the issues down that have to be addressed, and then after the 42A before the evidence circulation. So Top Energy is trying to find the best way to do this efficiently.
Okay, we'll sow the seed now, and we'll hear back from you sort of at some point as part of this hearing as to how you would see those mechanics working.
Yeah, I think from the officer's point of view, I mean, obviously we don't want to be too much led by what the officer's views are, the decision is ours, but at the end of the day, we've got to be sure that as an infrastructure provider, the provisions work. Because Norton, there's enough problems with that, and infrastructure falling away totally, but also just to have the benefit of you being confident that as officers it was a workable situation and reasonable timings in doing so, because it's always a worry sending people off to caucus and then wondering when the hell they're going to come back, sort of stuff.
So that's particularly leading towards actually sending out some instructions to the panel, some advice on instructions to the parties to sort of outline what our expectation would be to bring us along on the ride, rather than just sort of, here's some provisions.
Yeah.
This is actually, maybe it adds value when it's more comprehensive. We take the sting out of these hearings, the front end, and we do that by providing information together early on. So again, we'll be doing something similar for the rezonings where we might say to somebody, this is what you want, this is some of the information that we'll need to consider, irrespective of whether we need to support or not.
Yeah, we just have to be confident that there was a solution, that it was going to come through a solution, we weren't going to hit an impasse by
Absolutely.
following that path, yeah.
There's never a guarantee through the chair that we'll all agree, of course, but we're there to work together. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, as David said, you really narrowed down the areas of disagreement prior to the hearing.
And I think if you are going to take that sort of comprehensive approach that James has suggested, I think it does need to be earlier than after the 42A. Recall that we've only got 2 weeks once the 42A comes.
Yeah, well, that's the
distributed. So I think, in my view, if for that to be effective, we would really need to start that a bit earlier. And it's the submission from Top Energy is there. It's quite comprehensive with other parties as well. We know what the issues are, and what it will do is, prior to coming into the hearing, in my opinion, will narrow down to the issues, so that we're focusing on that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we'd want to consider too is as to whether we need that to be facilitated or whether you could manage it amongst yourselves. It seems to me that there are discrete groups that, it seems to be up to 3, 4, even up to 5 parties who think you don't need to be facilitated, but happy to hear other opinions about that.
Whether this has also come from earlier in the year, Plan Change 1 and Whangarei, so independent panel there, 3, they issued direction for caucusing. There was about half a dozen of us. We did the caucusing on our own. I think if you do get over sort of half a dozen, 8, it gets a bit unwieldy, and probably a facilitator can be helpful, but I actually think when you're in a smaller group, it can be quite effective. We're all relatively experienced planners. We can pull it together and do a joint statement. So that will just be my view on that. Happy to take whatever direction you determine on that piece.
Yeah, that was my feeling. So that sort of reflects what I was thinking. I'm happy to hear Councillor Berry at some point. Okay.
Any questions?
I think I've gone through all the questions that I sort of have listed here, so I'll open it up to other members of the panel.
Just got one, if I may, and I should have brought it up when you were presenting, sorry, but it's the maps that you presented right at the start, and your evidence talks about significant overlaps. And I would have thought that would have been quite clear from the maps when I looked at them. I couldn't quite see whether it was significant or not, but there are some overlaps, particularly this first map. Is it just the scale, and is there a whole lot of detail that I'm missing from looking at this?
So it's not. This is a very zoomed out detail. But if you zoom in and look at it, I can't do this on the screen. But the key thing is to note that in the coastal, it's just gone nuts. In the coastal areas, so at that scale, you're not going to see the coastal environments where a lot of Top Energy's MKV infrastructure is, because just how spread out it is. But that's where a lot of the coastal communities are.
That's that second map,
Yeah, second map. So that second map zoomed out doesn't look significant, but if you actually look, if you zoomed in and looked at the coastal environment and where that is, that's where a lot of the farming settlements are, because people want to live next to the coast. So I say significant, not just necessarily on the scale of that whole entire map, but when you look at it across where the actual infrastructure is, there are a number of overlaps. It's not like we're talking about just a couple of lines going through it. There'll be a number of lines. That's to do with the existing infrastructure. The thing that's not included on the map is new infrastructure. Now, that's where I said at the start, accepting that, there will be if there is a consenting requirement, it's suitable in those areas because the sensitive requirement passes through. But that's where the objectives and policies are really key. There needs to be a pathway.
So just to clarify, you're mainly talking about the coastal environment overlay, because your evidence at 4.3 splits the two maps out, and yes, about the natural environment overlays, that first map saying that it's a significant overlay, and then when you're talking about the coastal one, you don't. But yeah, it's almost the other way around, isn't it?
So no, even in Figure 1, which is attachment 1, around the coast, a lot of the outstanding landscapes and features which don't really show up on this map are in the coastal environment. Yeah, so yes, you can see like even that the 110 kV line which runs right up the guts. Unfortunately, my computer's stalled now. I can't see the presentation, but that goes right up. It goes right through what is a outstanding natural landscape. So there's one big expanse there. but then there's also other ones in there, but again, the scale of it doesn't really show it that well. We could get some zoomed in GIS maps if you want to see as well.
That's helpful. And I guess at that sort of lower level, do they mainly follow roads, these lines, or are they through farmland?
We would follow roads where we could, but in a lot of those areas, it's not possible, so it does go over land, far away from roads.
Okay, so it's a mix.
Yeah, it is a mix, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, our preference would be to follow roads, but that's not always practical.
Yeah.
Roads aren't always there.
Yeah.
What's not also shown on there is that's the top energy network public infrastructure, but there's a lot of private infrastructure lines which aren't actually managed by top energy, but actually form part of the wider network. So that's not a full picture of it, it's just an indication.
Are they privately owned and operated?
Yeah, there is a lot of problem. Yeah, there's a whole LV, low voltage network that doesn't show. Some of that's privately owned and some of that we look after. So it kind of ties in with that comment earlier about infrastructure versus regionally significant infrastructure.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you for the response.
I think that's all our questions for you. So thank you very much for your concise presentation and your answer to our questions and your evidence. And we'll be in touch, obviously, to maybe further facilitate some conferencing between the infrastructure party.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, I have 2 comments just.
Yes. Okay. All good.
6 does need to change.
Okay, well, this, you are Dennis and Jennifer and Dennis and Jennifer Woolley.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time.
Please have a seat. Please be seated. Just, I take it you haven't been to many hearings before?
No.
No, so we're here to hear your submission. We want you to feel comfortable. Present. I see you've got something in writing for us.
Yes, I have.
Okay, are you going to talk directly to this?
Yes, I am. That's okay.
Okay. We've got the submission here as well. So. Now, I understand your evidence today is in relation to your property.
Yes, it is.
Your property, I think it's in Kalakau.
That's
Russell Kalakau.
Russell Carlton.
Well, so we'll hand it over to you to present your submission. And we might have some questions for you at the end.
okay. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do is just run through an introduction in terms of our property and our history to our property, then also run through the business consents that we have, and then how the proposed plan applies to our land and what we've currently done. So we own 113 hectares of property in Ōmāpere Inlet, described legally as Lot 1 DP 477335, Lot 3 MLP 481893, and Lots 2 and 3 DP 383105. The address is 2195 Waikari Road, Waikari, Russell. This land has been in our family for 86 years. It was purchased on the 10th of February 1938. We understand that there once was a dwelling which was accessed from the sea. A number of the original tracks are still in existence throughout the property. The land was used to raise sheep until 1951. From then until the early 1980s, it was used by the adjoining neighbours to graze cattle. Periodically, they used to burn off the gorse and bush on our land until the New Zealand Forest Service prevented this from occurring in the early 1980s. The land then became progressively overgrown with gorse, tea tree and bush. In late 2004, the Hurley family decided to resettle our land and establish a place that our family could enjoy. We have existing resource consents for 5 building sites, 3 houses, 3 sheds, a swimming pool, recreation area, an excavation site, an orchard, 15 kilometres of track, and 3.35 kilometres of driveway, a boat ramp, a floating jetty, landing area, and boat shed, along with vegetation clearance of 1.9 kilometres for a fence line. So you can see we've got quite a few resource consents in place. We know that the area where our main residence and driveway down to our boat ramp are located were previously and continue to be excluded from the high natural character. However, our shared, other cleared sites, along with the driveways through our property, which are 6 metres in width carriageways, have been blanketly included in the description of high natural character, and I've attached a number of appendices here. So first one is referred to Appendix 4. Outstanding natural landscape, refer please to Appendix 5, or outstanding natural character, refer Appendix 6. We believe that where there are man-made structures, such as our shed, driveways and cleared sites, the word naturalness of the landscape is diminished or removed, and the term natural should not be applied to them. In particular, 2 of the building sites are 4,000 metres squared each, for which the earthworks and driveway were completed in mid-2018, and we have resource consent for a house and shed on each site. However, these 2 sites have been included in the outstanding natural character overlay. And again, I'll refer you to outstanding natural character 109, lot DP 383105 in Appendix 6. The original consent dated the 18th of May 2007 from the Northern Regional Council was for a boat ramp, floating jetty and landing area, which were completed in 2008 with the exception of the floating jetty. On the 21st of April 2009, the Whānau District Council issued a resource consent for a building platform, house, shed and driveway from the landing to the building site. The earthworks for our building site and the driveway from the landing to the building site were completed 16 years ago. As part of the conditions imposed in this consent, we were required to lodge an animal and weed pest management plan, and please refer to Appendix 1, which included some 15 kilometres of tracks, approximately 3 to 5 metres in width, for the servicing of the bait stations and traps. To date, we've created approximately 7 kilometres of the tracks. On the 22nd of August 2013, the Whānau District Council issued a resource consent which included a 5-year extension on the previous consent, along with a building site, a shed, a swimming pool, a boat shed and orchard, an excavation site, a recreation area, 1.9 kilometres of vegetation clearance for a fence line upgrade, and approximately 2.9 kilometres of driveway with up to 8 metres wide vegetation clearance. These works were completed in 2018, and the house and the shed were signed off in 2023. On the 9th of May 2014, the Whānau District Council issued a resource consent which enabled us to gain access to Waikari Road, as previously we were landlocked. On the 13th of October 2014, the Whānau District Council issued a resource consent for 2 further building sites, houses and sheds, and 1 kilometre of driveway with up to 8 metres wide vegetation clearance. These works were completed in 2018. Our family want to maintain the natural values of the site and ensure that the high standards of development to protect the coastal environment, but we also want to be able to enjoy everything that this unique environment has to offer. We have planted over 3,000 native specimen trees and plants over the last 12 years. Our intention is to keep our land cat and dog free, and we are committed to continuing with our pest management plan to eradicate possums, stoats, pigs, ferrets, rabbits and rats, to bring back the third life and conserve the habitats of this area. This is a time-intensive and costly exercise. In 2008, we have incurred, since 2008, we have incurred approximately $2,000 annually for possum and rodent bait, as well as the original cost to set up the bait stations and track. We service bait stations as a minimum quarterly, 4 to 6 days in a row, and it takes about 2 hours per day to service them. We also spend approximately $2,000 annually on chemicals and 12 days per annum spraying and manually removing galls, tobacco, wheat and wattle. We take a view that respect of the natural, archaeological and cultural values is part of the family's responsibility in looking after this land, but that equally it is not a public reserve and appropriate development in the use of land must be provided for. We have worked for the past 16 years to remove invasive weeds and pests to make our property a better environment for our family to enjoy. Since we've been undertaking these activities, we've noticed a considerable increase in the number and types of birds returning to our property. As already stated, our land was pastoral and used as grazing up to as recently as 1983. Since the early 1980s, it has progressively become overgrown with gorse, canuka, wattle and bush, and more recently, tobacco wheat. We know that this land was pastoral grazing land from 1867 to 1983, some 116 years. We feel that we were not treated fairly when the Whānau District Council zoned our land as outstanding landscape back in 1995. It is our belief that this land should never have been zoned outstanding landscape, considering that the vegetation that is found on our land can be found at numerous locations throughout Northland, including the properties that are adjacent to ours. And the fact that whilst in our family ownership, it was farmed for some 45 years. The effect of having this land already classified as outstanding landscape has been that the council has imposed additional costs and lengthy delays for us to gain resource consents to date. The implications of the proposed overlays of high natural character, outstanding natural landscape, and outstanding natural character are potentially very significant and adverse, compelling costly and arguably unnecessary applications for further resource consents. We feel that it is unfair having the Whānau District Council blanketly classifying our land in this manner, restricting what we can do on what is privately owned land and imposing extra layers of costs. We consider that the Whānau District Council should not blanketly map our property as high natural character, outstanding natural landscape, or outstanding natural character and impose all the restrictions and extra costs that go with these classifications. The photos that the mapping process has been based on, and I'll refer you please to Appendix 3, are woefully out of date. The photo used for our property appears to have been taken pre-March 2010, being at least 14 years out of date. It does not reflect the subsequent consented works that has already been completed over the last 16 years. Attached in Appendix 2 are a series of Google photos of our property from 2000 to 2019, which clearly shows the progress we have made on the consented works on our property. We are not aware that anybody has physically walked over our property as part of this planning process, and that reliance has been made on a woefully out-of-date aerial photography as the only basis for claims for the blanket classifications. that geographical identification without physically walking over our property and respect to existing land uses is insufficient in isolation to blanket classifications on our property. We are not commercial developers. This land, as previously stated, has been in the family for 86 years, and we wish to continue to enjoy it and preserve it for future generations. The vegetation that is currently on our land grew whilst in our family ownership. We love healthy specimens of trees, and over the last 20 years, we have consistently worked hard and spent a lot of money to enhance our property. By proposing to put these blanket classifications on our land, this will result in taking away our property rights on what is privately owned land. As I said, we've had resource consents in place since 2007 and have progressively completed the consented works since then. We oppose our land being subject to the suggested blanketed, quote unquote, outstanding areas, i.e. high natural character, outstanding natural landscape, and outstanding natural character in the proposed regional policy statement. In particular, classifying a large part of Lot 3, DP 383105, as outstanding natural character 109 will prevent us from completing the works that we already have consent for, and we have family members that wish to build on these sites in the future. We would like the council to remove the identified outstanding areas from our private land. We are submitting on having the following proposed blanket classifications removed. Reference 57, outstanding natural landscape, reference 452, high natural character, and reference 109, outstanding natural character. This area is already zoned general coastal under the final district council plan with outstanding landscape feature. There is already a large area of publicly owned bush conserved in this area, being dock land and a Russell forest. It is difficult for us to understand why there are outstanding natural character and high natural character notations mapped over our privately owned and already developed property, whereas for the Russell forest, that has huge native trees, it has only been designated as high natural character. There is little or no visibility of the outstanding natural character 109 area identified on our property as viewed from public viewing points on land. The Ōmāpere inlet at this point is shallow and generally inaccessible. It is not subject to boat traffic. Opportunities to view the subject site are very limited. We execute on our conservation values on our property through actively implementing our ongoing pest and weed management. We already have land use consent from the Finals District Council to settle our family property with existing consent conditions, including the pest management plan. The Finals District Council plan already has quite strict rules covering any development in this area. We submit that a fundamental criteria for mapping natural character and natural landscape is that such notation should not include extensive area, particularly where there is little or no access for the public and little or no public viewing points. We further submit that it should not include where there are man-made structures such as our shared driveways and cleared sites. The coastal areas, natural features and landscapes have been subject to district plan rules restricting development since 1996. In addition, the adjoining mangroves have been mapped as outstanding natural landscape, and the adjoining swamp land has been mapped as outstanding natural character 110. The adjoining swamp land was farmed as pastoral land and only became a swamp towards the end of last century. So the decisions we seek are the removal from the proposed district plan of the blanket mapping over our property of the high natural character 452, and the removal of the proposed district plan of the blanket mapping over our property of outstanding natural landscape, and the removal from the proposed district plan of the blanket mapping of the outstanding natural character 109 and the outstanding natural character 110. We further seek that where there are man-made structures such as our shared driveways and cleared sites, the naturalness of the landscape is diminished or removed, and that the term natural should not be applied to them. Thank you.
you very much for your evidence and your presentation. You've obviously put a lot of work into this, and you're not qualified planners or landscape architects. So thank you very much for the effort you've put in. Just take us through your attachments, just so that we've got them all understood. So you've got a copy of your pest management draft plan there?
Yes, we have.
Okay, and that shows.
So that's appendix 1.
Yes.
And the first page shows you the
We've got an X on the plan. That's where that's a building site, isn't it?
That's a building site that we already have built the house.
That's where it's for. Okay, and then your next attachment is these are the set of 4 photos.
Yes, so we're just trying to demonstrate, we just took the Thompson survey to extract the Google photos from different times since 2000 to 2019, just to demonstrate that we have actually carried out what was consented works.
And that's showing your revegetation planting efforts.
This is showing the driveways, the cleared sites, in particular, the one in 2019 shows the number of cleared sites, our house sites. When we send it through electronically, you'll be able to zoom in on it and get a better view.
And so appendix 3
is the one that has been used in the proposed plan, where it does not demonstrate all the works that have actually been completed.
and then appendix 4 is.
So again, we asked Thompson Survey to overlay the different proposed plan areas on a 2024 Google image, so that you can see how it relates to areas where we've actually completed works. And we've so the next 3 are the different categories of overlay.
So the next one is the outstanding natural landscapes.
Correct.
And then the final one is
The outstanding natural character overlay. And that one in particular, if you look sort of in the middle of the page, you'll see the reference lot 3 DP 383105, and you'll see the area outstanding natural character overlaid on that, but it's overlaid on the 2 cleared building site areas of 4,000 metres squared.
Thank you. Ms. Axel, you considered this property and this submission as part of your report.
I did.
I'm just wondering if you need to make some comments on the evidence presented. I mean, if you want to take further time, it can be included in the written response as well.
Yeah, I certainly, on the last point, I would like the opportunity to reply in a fuller way later. Thank you. But just for your reference, I have addressed this submission on page 8 and page 31 of my report.
Okay.
So that's where you can find. Just check there isn't another one.
What was that, the page references again?
8 and 31. So page 8's looking at the ONL. And 31 is looking at the outstanding and emergent natural character areas. Certainly, I agree with the submitters when they say that the maps used in the proposed district plan are out of date. As I say in my report, I also looked at Google Maps, which are more up to date, much more up to date. And it was quite clear to me that, as they've illustrated in their series of aerial photographs, that development has occurred over a period of time. I was interested to note that the coastal area's natural features, sorry, I'm reading from the submitter's evidence, paragraph 43. The coastal area's natural features and landscapes have been subject to district plan rules restricting development since 1996. I'm not entirely clear what that means, but nevertheless, a series of consents have been granted by the council since that date. So it would appear that whatever those restrictions were, did not prevent development being undertaken. I would need more time to go through the information that's included in the maps in the submission before I make any further comment on what that means. It's quite possible that were I to visit the property and have a look in some detail at all three overlays, that there may be some amendments that would be sensible to undertake. But I haven't had the opportunity to do that.
Would that be something you would want to do prior to the officer's response in 2 weeks' time? Or is that feasible?
It probably would be sensible to do that. The difficulty I face is this situation may apply to more than this property. And there is a limited window in which I can undertake site visits. So while yes, that would be a sensible approach, I just flag that as a potential official commitment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, clearly, we can't make that decision on our own. Some agreement from Leeds as well. And similarly, they don't have to accept what Malene comes up with, Ms. Epsilon comes up with, and similarly, we don't have to agree either. But it seems to me that it would make sense to consider the opportunity.
Well, it may be that we would entertain a longer period to respond to perhaps this amendment or all of them.
Yeah, I think the point rate, Ms. Epsilon is on a period of leave for a considerable period of time, unfortunately. But depends on whether the panel, I guess, wishes to, whether they wish to land with it and when they wish to land with it, I guess. If it was an opportunity that it could be arranged mutually, there's a few things that obviously need to tick before we can even sort of get it moving. But
it's the only sensible way that we could get any resolution of this matter is for Malene to be on the site, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the submitters because I don't know them, but I'd be very surprised if they didn't provide for that to be the case, and for the opportunity for some closer investigation of it. That's the only way that we would get sufficient information to make a sensible decision.
perhaps we can engage with the Woolies at some stage very shortly after, probably this hearing. I suspect we'll be very full on this week, but very shortly after the conclusion of this hearing. But we may suggest that the period of time for which this and perhaps others might relate in terms of our right of reply might be able to say some of the words.
Yeah, so we just, yeah, so I have to give you the indication now that we're not wedded to a 2-week response. That's just, the standard. This is the standard response. As Epsilon said, well, my opinion could benefit with being on site.
Yeah.
So, we really want to see that happen. We've got the submitters here who have taken the trouble to present their case. We're prepared to have an open mind in terms to allow that to happen before we conclude a right of reply. So it seems to me that we just need to work together and see how we can make it work.
Yeah, we'd have to provide the opportunity for that closer work to be done by Malene to report back to us, but then also for the submitters to have the opportunity to respond again as well.
Yeah. The other thing is that we may want to go to your property as well, following any further responses.
Just to clarify though, as I say, my intention is to maybe separate out the bulk of the written right of reply versus these sort of assessment matters, just to clarify that the panel's.
Happy to do that as a discrete, we're happy to look at that as a discrete element of the right of reply that could be extended.
Thank you.
And if you say, oh, well, heck, we'll do 95% of it, but with regards to the Woolly property and the Upland and maybe a couple of others,
We would
we'd like it,
Yeah.
And, this is a marathon, not a sprint, so we've got, the time is there.
Could be a marathon of sprints, sir.
Okay, right, we'll leave it with you, and I'll encourage you to engage with the submitter to work out what
Thank you.
might work out for everyone's big ones. Best interest. Just wait before you go, there might be some other questions from the other panel member.
Your submission remains live until that divisional work's carried out.
Yes.
I'm not saying stay with these, see you later now. The stage, most of the submitters that present to us, I mean, they present and that's the end of the story, but obviously your works can be looked at further.
Just a comment regarding the 4 photos on the one page where you have a timeline and go over that. There were some questions this morning regarding the time frame and the mapping and when the mapping was originally done. So I think this here in particular was really helpful to show that over time. And I note the date on it is from Thompson Survey, the 4th and 7th, 24. So this was only done recently and wasn't with the original submission. So it's probably really helpful to the specialist landscape architects as well to see that modified landscape. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to us.
Right, we've got it.
I just have two quick questions, please, and thank you for your detailed submission in writing. It was very helpful. The works that you've had consented to date, that doesn't involve any subdivision, does it? It's all just kind of land use and... Yeah, okay. And then the second thing was, when you got those consents for that land use development, did you have to get a landscape architect to help you with those applications, to provide any sort of assessment from your side?
For the house we did, and and some of the driveways we did as well.
Right. And, could they be helping you with this process and working with Lillian Teachley to...
Well, the lady that we use, she's retired.
She's retired, okay, right. But you'd be happy to rely on what Lillian's doing rather than getting your own sort of independent advice from a landscape architect? I mean, I'm just suggesting that might be an avenue.
Sorry, I'm not sure I followed what you're saying.
Well, Lillian's employed by the council to do the job that she needs to do, but we've had other submitters come through with their own landscape architects that show us where the lines should be drawn on their properties, but you're just saying take the lines off altogether from your perspective.
That's what we're proposing.
Yeah, is there any appetite from you to have your own independent advice from a landscape architect to assist with that?
Well, if we couldn't come to the council, then it would probably.
Right, okay, but you haven't gone down that track yet.
No.
That's answering the question. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the effort and the speaking to us today here to tell us about your property. Just a quick question I wanted to know. So it's great to see your stewardship on your blocks of land and returning them to these to the natural states, and hence also council sees the value in that as well. But what I wanted to check with you is whether you had any conservation covenants or any protections across your pieces of land.
No.
And so just to follow on from that, the track, the tracks that you're doing, this is changing it from farming back to the natural bush or enjoyment of yourself and your families. And that sort of is the intention. It's not looking as my colleague had asked the question about subdivisions. It's more about enabling families to put homes on the blocks of land.
Yeah, all the work that we've done is for our families to enjoy.
And you've kept it in the family for quite a while, so and all your hard efforts have been shown with the aerials. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that is the end of our questions. So thank you very much for your submission and your evidence and the answers to our questions and your attendance today. It's not quite over for you yet, because there might be some site visits and some further reporting. The council will be back in touch with you, or the hearing administrator. Someone will be back in touch with you to facilitate further action.
Good as gold, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll take just a quick afternoon break. We've got people online.
We do, but they're okay.
They're good to, and 4 o'clock in New Zealand, we're pretty much bang on time. We're back.
20 minutes.
We'll take a 20-minute break. We'll come back at 10. That's all.
3 more people to go.
You've been at the hearing that's been on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stopping the recording.